Yo, yo, what up? Technique Tuesday, where I share and break down some of my favorite techniques with you. Today, we're going to talk about the jab, right? The jab is one of my favorite sword fighting techniques. It has a really low skill floor and a really high skill ceiling, and it can be used in any form of competitive or casual sword fighting, from foam sword fighting to SCA to HMB singles, and you can even find its use in a variety of other disciplines. And if you're a big fan of combat sports or combat sports theory, if you follow sports like boxing, kickboxing, MMA, you'll see that a lot of game plans are built off of the jab. You can create combinations that are built off of the jab. It can establish volume and steal pace in a fight. You can use it to relieve yourself from pressure. You can leave on an angle with a jab. There's a lot of things you can do. So I think it's a really, really important fundamental strike in sword fighting because it allows you to do things like set up combinations, create volume, attack from a distance, use it as an entry, and we'll go into a little bit about it today. So when you're throwing a jab, you can throw a jab from any stance that has your hand present in home base, right? In this kind of configuration where your bicep is tightened and ready to explode, and your hand is about level with the opponent's face. And that's because when you throw the jab, you want the jab to line up directly with the opponent's forehead. Now, when you're in a LARP environment, for example, you don't want to throw this shot at the face because this jab can land directly into the face if you're not careful. You really want to aim higher, like you're throwing into the helmet. In a sport like SCA, where you can thrust to the face, it isn't as big a deal because the disambiguation between a shot that comes in and lands in the face and a shot that's a thrust to the face is like not as stark. If you're using this technique in HMB, you have to be really careful because of the tendency of opponents to advance on you when you're throwing a strike. So if you're throwing a jab like this and you angle your sword and you break your wrist too much when you're throwing, you can kind of be in this kind of a position at the end of the strike. So if you're whiffing or throwing out of range and your opponent steps in on you, that can be a really dangerous situation that you want to avoid. So you want to pick the correct range when throwing the jab. Second off, when you're throwing the jab, you want to always be moving forward, right? It isn't a hip rotation technique, it's a weight distribution technique, and it's an explosive technique. So when you're in your position, if for example I adopt something like the neutral guard, as opposed to being in like an A-frame or a hanging guard or whatever guard you want. If you adopt like a neutral guard, right, and you try to throw a jab from a hands down position, you first have to raise your arm to home base prior to throwing. So when you're setting up to throw a jab, you should already be in home base. The second thing you should do, right, is you don't want to change the angulation of your hand. You don't want to move left or right, you don't want to move up or down, you just want to go straight, boom, right? And when you extend, you want to avoid hyperextending your elbow and hyperextending your wrist. You extend your arm, you snap your wrist at the end, right? Like with any other traditional sword fighting technique, like the flat snap, the offside, you're always snapping your wrist at the end. So when you line yourself up on the target, imagine that you're throwing, right at the top, right between the eyes or at the forehead, depending on what game you're in, right? And explode forward with the technique. Boom, boom, right? And it's important that when you're coming out, it's explosive, it's quick. You're not looking to like blast through the target, you're looking to make contact with sufficient legal power for point scoring. Right, so if you're in LARP, a LARP environment, it's always the touch that counts, it's not the force, so you don't have to blast somebody. If you're throwing an SCA or in Buhurt, you can definitely apply more spice behind that shot and come in with a stronger shot. Now you see when I'm throwing the shot, I'm not twisting my hips, I'm not changing the rotation or angulation of my foot, I'm really exploding forward towards the target. So I'm lifting my heel of the front foot, and I'm projecting myself forward off of my back foot. I'm extending my arm, and I'm breaking my wrist at the end of the strike. Boom, right? In order to land that shot at the face or at the forehead. Now, a couple particularities about this strike is that it's really important when you're throwing jabs to always keep your shield up to cover your head, because if you keep your shield down, somebody has the opposite angle, the return angle on you for the jab. So you can throw a jab like in this kind of an orientation, and you'll take a shot to the head in return. But if you throw a jab and you're covering your head at the same time, you're covering that return angle, and you should be able to avoid the trade in that instance. You can also use head movement when throwing the jab in order to take your head offline, and that can take you out of the return line or the return lane for the opposing jab. So if you imagine two fighters are jabbing at each other, if you try to take your head off lane, boom, after you throw, it's a great way to avoid incoming jabs via head movement. Jabs are also really nice for setting up combination and creating volume because they force the opponent to guard the face or guard the head, which causes them to bring up their implements in front of them, and it reduces their line of sight and their peripheral vision. So it's great for setting up a combination like jab to flat snap one, where you throw the jab, it causes them to raise their defense, and you follow up with the flat snap one, which is now available, and it's one of the furthest targets from where you're throwing the jab, so it's really hard for them to defend. So For example, jab, flat snap one. You can also use the jab as a fake and just pump the jab, boom, and have them to react. If you've nailed them with a couple of them, boom, and they'll pull up that defense and you have an available target somewhere else on the opponent. A really good tip for setting up the jab is your foot orientation. It's always really good to have your front foot or your lead foot lined up with the center line of the opponent. So if you're lined up, if you're in the open stance, which is somebody standing against you in orthodox while you're at southpaw, you want to try to maneuver to the inside of their lead foot to throw that jab, because if you're on the outside of their center line, you're not going to have the ideal angle. And the same thing is if you're in the closed stance. So if I'm fighting against somebody who's also standing in southpaw, I want to make sure that I'm going to orient my lead foot to the inside of their lead foot so that I can have that shot on the center line. If I'm outside of their lead foot, I don't have that shot. I'm shooting through their guard. So that's pretty much it. Super quick breakdown of the jab, and it's a technique that you can use in a variety of situations. It has a really high skill ceiling because you can use it to do things like jab out of a combination, so you can throw flat snap, outside, flat snap, jab, jab, as you're stepping out and cutting off an angle, and it prevents the opponent from rushing you down. So stay tuned for more. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think. Like, comment, subscribe, and catch you guys later for more Technique Tuesday. Peace out.